the biography that I'm trying to put together as well, uh, it is, you're absolutely right to say that what happens if you don't like this person. I don't think I like this person very much, but I think she's important and complex enough to be somebody through whom one can address a lot of different questions that I am interested in. Biography, I feel also, I mean, certainly not this kind of laudatory, celebratory kind of hagiography thing. And there is an assumption that biographies must be written on people who are worthy of biographies. Much like, the autobiography thing that we were talking about. And I think methodologically or in terms of a historiographical genre, I think it allows us the opportunity to explore precisely this relationship between a public persona, an interior life, and the impact that they have. For instance, I noticed again when I was doing this research that her name Durga is really sort of deployed in order to produce her during the emergency as this kind of warrior almost. So she's really also, she becomes a kind of placeholder onto which a whole lot of hopes and desires for what writers should be, or for what sort of freedom of speech really a public sphere ought to have, and so on, are put, which is, of course, then she draws on herself, but this is a dialogic process then between the way this person also lives their life, constructs their life, and the way a life is often sort of thrust upon them. And that tension I am interested in, both in terms of the scholarly work that she has done, which I think is of very variable quality. Again, so I'm not interested in resurrecting a kind of vernacular scholar who didn't make it in the English realm. I mean, this is not a kind of patriotic endeavor, but it allows us to think, what are the genres through which regional language writers have actually engaged various scholarly concepts, which are always somehow in between what we in the English Language Academy think of as articles or books or monographs or whatever, right? Which makes translating them difficult. When I started writing in Marathi myself, I found that I just did not have the idiom or the generic familiarity to write, let alone a sense of the audience. So all of these questions which I think I have grappled with myself in terms of my language politics or my academic work and so on, I feel I can address through this person. It helps that, I mean, she's, there are images, people who knew her have told me that you can see Durga Bhagwat as dressed in a 9-yard sari, holding a glass of wine at the Asiatic Society, which is just a very contradictory image. Somebody who was very old and frail looking, who was incredibly fit and interested in the body and so on, who is very, very radical in some ways but very conservative in other ways, and who was very much into these like traditional womanly things like knitting and cooking and so on, but with also a very sharp material anthropologist's eye on them. These contradictions I find interesting, and that's really what so I don't definitely want to resurrect her or present her as somebody who ought to have been better understood than she was in life. But if I can puncture, like she did, a lot of received images of her, I think that would complicate, I shouldn't say puncture, complicate images, I think I would be yay. It's interesting that you say Baluta is also episodic, and I have not dealt with the specific Dalit autobiographies here at all, because they do seem to me that the kind of Lalit Gadya I am talking about is in a sense indulgent in a way that Dalit autobiographies or memoirs are not. And but as I go along, I think I will have to look at like the kind of writing that Dhale, particularly Dhale, Dhasal, And some of the earlier sort of urban little magazine people were also doing. So I come to that at the time. The voice issue, I'm still kind of working with that. I mean, again, the thing that I referred to is that there is a distinctive, very kind of strident moral voice, and Soumya's paper also kind of helped me sort of think through some of this, that who is a writer? Like the term Bandhilki is a term that Durgabai uses a lot, which is fidelity. And I thought of titling my book Freedom and Fidelity, actually, because these are the two things that she becomes most known for, in a way. What should a writer's fidelity be to? Lekhakani Bandhilki is a... Yeah, so, I mean, definitely this ethics of being a writer is a kind of voice that she wants to develop. But I think the pettiness of it, the bitterness of it, it does come through. And so that voice, in spite of itself, I think is a much more uneven, halting one, which I hope I'll be able to sort of put together.
Prachi, you said that knitting is conservative, but you also practice knitting.
I don't think it's conservative. I think it's radical. I think it's great. I'm perfectly happy to be known as a knitter before anything else. And this is definitely one of the things that attracted me to Durgabai in the first place. She's totally obsessive of embroidery, 15 different kinds of embroidery that she wants to that. But it is often thought of as conservative. When somebody has a knitting project in their hand, which I do, it's often thought that, oh, then you must be like a homemaker, do you have a child on the way, did your grandmother. So these things are associated with her conservatism, and I don't think they are conservative. I think they come up from a materiality, an interest in the materiality of life, but doing things with one's hands that she is very, very kind of passionate
about. Thank you very much, Rita, for that question. Actually, when I was thinking of the form that my writing on Mukti Bodh will take, recently then Akshay Mukul's biography of a gay had also come out. And I read that book and I decided that this is not what I wanted to do. For several reasons. One of the reasons is also that I will not be able to do that. The other reason is that I am not interested in that sort of know-it-all kind of biography. So I was more interested in looking at a set of... at the same time actually, the other biography also came out in English. Nirmal Verma's, Vineet Gill's, which he says is a reader's biography. So that idea sort of caught my imagination. Although I had problems with Vineet Gill's reading of Nirmal Verma, but I thought that a reader's biography of Mukti Bodh with certain sort of frames where I cut through Mukti Bodh's oeuvre and sort of present it to the readers in Hindi as well as English would be the project that I would like to do. Now, I was very interested in Mukti Bodh for one more reason, is that if you look at the late 1930s in the Hindi public sphere, is that the idea of Mukti becomes very sort of, it catches the imagination of Hindi writers. And two very prominent examples which come to mind are Mukti Bodh and the other is Rahul Sankrityayan, who repeatedly would write about liberation, Mukti, on a register which is ambiguously either literary or theological. So clearly there is a larger conversation going on within Hinduism, which we usually do not sort of think the two together. We think that if it's Mukti and Marxism, it has to go on one track, and if it is caste and so on, it has to go on the track of Hinduism. But clearly there is a conversation with structural categories of Hinduism. Now, my other interest is that I am also deeply interested in sociology of science and sociology of mathematics. And if you look at these categories, I'll connect that to it. The first three categories, Brahman, Raja and Vanik, are actually categories which constitute the social imagination. So they are householder, merchants and so on. Sannyasi is the asocial category. Asocial category standing outside the structural partitions of Hinduism. Now, in another paper, I've argued that in the late 1930s, it emerges that in the asocial category where sannyasi is located, there emerged two more categories. One is that of the Vaigyanik, and the other is that of the Sahityak. So you have the Vaigyanik writing about science, but writing about very self-consciously about science as a Hindu. So you have P.C. Mahalanobis, who on the one hand would write papers on different kinds of statistical measures and so on, but would also say that it's a contribution to Hindu statistics. So clearly there is a way in which these literateurs and scientists were situating themselves with Hinduism as sort of a moral voice, that they have something to sort of say to the caste Hinduism, which otherwise is not being said by the sannyasis, because sannyasis are becoming increasingly political figures, very much embroiled in the social like Gandhi, and do not have the agency to really sort of converse with the moral order of Hinduism. And in Muktibodh too, I mean, this is in the paper I develop it in detail, and also the question of labor I come to, because in Muktibodh he writes Ek Sahityak Ki Diary and other such diary entries in order to shed light on the labor of writing poetry. So he says, I am interested in the labor process of poetry. What Prasad gives us, what Mahadevi gives us, and so on, are finished products. They do not give us an insight into the process. So the question of shram or labor is actually quite central for Muktibodh, again in conversation with these categories, which are taken as these settled structural partitions. So I try to develop it in detail, where that kind of scholarship is coming from and how is it that I am trying to situate Muktibodh vis-a-vis that. Ek Sahityak Ki Diary was very interesting for me as a title for one more reason. I said Mukti is one category. The other category which is very central to Ek Sahityak Ki Diary is Mitrata. Now you have all conversations that Muktibodh has in the Sahityak Ki Diary are with Mitra. In fact, they have a very strong affective, each piece concludes with on a very strong affective note. And it says like this in something in Hindi, कि वीरकर से मेरी लंबी बहस हुई, उसने मुझे बहुत परेशान किया, but अंततः वो मेरा दोस्त है, मेरा मित्र है, वो मुझे प्रिय है, आहा उसका चेहरा कितना सुंदर है. So ultimately the text ends with an affective sort of this thing with the mitra, and mitrata is actually a category which is very important for Ek Sahityak Ki Diary, vis-a-vis all other sort of ways of imagining intimacy, kinship, which are otherwise present in Hindi literature as pati patni, as grihasth and whatever. So that was one of which I try to do in another paper where I look at the category called Mitrata. So overall, my objective is to identify these sort of flag these categories as Mitrata, Mukti, and then look at Muktibodh's work and to see what kind of conversations it can generate. To the last point about the affective relationship with Muktibodh, I think I like Muktibodh. And the reason behind is that it also allows us a certain kind of thinking which has not taken place in the Hindi public sphere. So I can write as a quote-unquote progressive poet and yet not say a word about caste, and even we do not have a vocabulary to speak about it. It's something which clearly troubles some Hindi writers, but they do not have the means to express it. By means of Muktibodh, I think that I can articulate that issue. Not just by saying that they are caste blind by design, that this is something which is, but to make a deeper, more nuanced argument about not just sort of looking at Muktibodh as an academic would, but also look at Muktibodh as a practicing poet would look at Muktibodh and see what are the issues that he grapples with, what he wants to do with the category called Sahityak and is not able to do perhaps. So there is that dimension too with Muktibodh.
My question is to John. When you are talking about Martin So you were talking about the indigenous knowledge system and all. So indigenous medicine system. So we can see a pattern during the Portuguese time. The Mateus Padre, the missionary, he was doing something with the indigenous medicine system. Then the Van Rijn during Dutch period, the Hortus Malabaricus was formed, combined, and then during he was also and it's Vidyasramam, it's coming in Malayalam. So can we see a pattern in indigenous medicine system and this text tradition, and can we trace a pattern, or do we have any supporting documents to substantiate if there exists a pattern with these missionaries, materials and indigenous collecting the indigenous medicine system? When in the starting you said about how this conversion and control, how this apply to this transfer of knowledge and indigenous medicine system. Can we connect all these dots, and can we say there is exist a pattern in the print tradition and printed tradition and indigenous medicine system?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to draw a pattern, but I don't know if, coming to the specific case of Martin himself, whether he thought so seriously about this lineage that we may kind of draw. He was one of the things that I cannot remember the exact year, but there was a whole cholera epidemic that happened in the 1850s, which he was very actively engaged in terms of relief work and other things. And during that occasion, and I think a lot of what he is actually thinking about public health is coming from his experiences of handling that entire epidemic scenario. So with Martin, a lot of it seemed more like rather than taking from certain kind of text, it was also based on a kind of an encounter with certain kind of experienced reality. So you don't see references to these kind of earlier texts, but I'm sure that it may have been part of the entire corpus that he was engaging with. That certainly could be there. Yeah. I don't think it answers your question entirely, but there's very little to kind of to actually say more about it.
I'd like to thank all the three presenters for, in my mind, I can see sort of maybe one important thread sort of running through it, and I'll try and, I'm still grappling with it, so I'm not sure how clearly I'll be able to, put it across. But first of all, congratulations and thank you to all presenters. Both Prachi and Soumya, you all sort of, that exchange between you all just now, acknowledging that the question of ethicality of, vis-a-vis the writer, being central to the way you all have been thinking about, Durga Bhagwat and Mukti Board. And, John's sort of reflections at the end, towards the end, trying to sort of point out that in the earlier period was important, whereas researchers sort of tend to sort of focus on the later 19th century. I mean, to me, that in some way, what all the when Prachi talks about the sort of frustrations and the pettiness that a personality as towering and as important as Durga Bhagwat sort of also, what comes out as a very, very strong sort of motive throughout her sort of life writing And what Soumya sort of also talks about, the anger, the visceral anger, right? What it seems to me is both these individuals are clearly also having to grapple with and take a position about and process. The sort of cumulative strength of what the public sphere around print has sort of structurally enabled and disabled. Right? So that is what the sort of, and the anger and the pettiness is one sort of expression of it. And the anger and, this sort of wanting to take on Prasad, literally sort of, fall him by the collar as it were, and then try and pass it apart. And this is what you should be saying, and this is where we can actually find something, and so on and so forth. I thought this sort of the idea of how what print enables and disables, this becomes invisible, right? The writer themselves cannot sort of say this is what their project is in writing about, is writing their their sort of either their analysis or their sort of self-reflections, right? So I'm wondering, in thinking about print and tradition. In a way, I think, all these three presentations actually address in a very sort of beautiful way the questions that the concept note actually crystallized. But what I think we need to sort of think about, it's an invitation, I think, to kind of begin to think about, how we can, for maybe different periods or different points through this, this the mid-19th century onwards to 1960 or whatever it is. Because Prachi, when I was listening to you, I was actually, this figure of the Marathi sort of the writer positioning themselves as fearless, iconoclastic. Durga Bhagwat is not the only person who does it, right? That's quite a sort of recurrent type of. There are very different sort of flavors that emerge from that basic sort of stance. I'm like, I was wondering how that would sit with Rahul's work about the self-image, about Rahul Sarvate. About his, the self-positioning of the Marathi intellectual at an early period as sort of inherently progressive and rational when they are trying to sort of, position themselves as offering something very special and specific to the national imaginary. Now, for a later period, has that sort of story come apart in this sort of figure of the writer trying, who needs to kind of speak of themselves, their relevance as arising from a fearlessness and an iconoclasm, that rational and progressive, that inherently sort of self-evident rationality and progressivism is no longer sort of available or justifiable. But it has become something else, I'll leave it there. I'm sort of still trying to
take one more comment finally.
Just a small point I may need to make, that when we see from Prasad to Muktibodh, and Muktibodh misses that point, that the question of individualism is not the same, which is pre-independence and post-independence. That is, Prasad is writing in a dying agrarian society. Muktibodh is seeing the question in a growing industrial society. So Muktibodh is seeing the individual question in his time, which Prasad and Nirala, and that's why in 6th volume, Muktibodh has not discussed Nirala single line. So because he was also confused or not able to solve the question of individual in the pre-independent society. So I think the Muktibodh reading of Kamaini misses the importance of individual in a pre-independent society. That
I'll come to just a brief response to that in the the sort of history that you're talking about, vis-a-vis that the print history that we view these figures. In Muktibodh's case, it's actually very interesting because it sort of happens at the intersection of two public spheres, the Marathi public sphere and the Hindi public sphere. So he writes about Harinarayan Apte, he writes about, and he writes these Vyakti Chitra as memoirs and sketches on these writers, and he is very critical of Prasad and others of borrowing from the Bengali Renaissance and of being forgetful of the fact that what is happening in the Maratha public sphere. So they have the kind of sense of reform. So he, in a sense, very interestingly, writes very much as a Marathi individual, but using Hindi as the language of expression. So the anger against Prasad is actually the anger against the structuring of the Hindi public sphere. And also it takes a very visceral form because he's unable to make any sort of inroads. He stays in Banaras, but he then comes out of Banaras. He tries to work in Calcutta, doesn't find a lasting sort of position, comes back out of, tries to stay in Bhopal, doesn't work out, tries to stay in Jabalpur. In fact, as in Jabalpur, he starts teaching logic in a school, in a girls' college. Again, doesn't work out. So there is, and the publishers are also sort of repeatedly sending back the poems and what is it that you are writing. It is so. It's also about the structural nature of the Hindi public sphere when viewed as as a Marathi sort of being exposed to the Marathi public sphere, and the anger is for the Hindi public sphere at large. There is the opposite movement in the brother, Sharat Chand Muktibodh, who writes in Marathi, sends out several poems in Marathi to editors to Marathi magazines, and they are not published. He warns the editor, threatens the editor, that if you do not publish this Marathi poem, I will also start writing in Hindi. So, this is, so Muktibodh, in a sense, that kind of relationship with the Hindi public sphere is a very complex relationship, which is also something which is captured by what you are asking. That in a way that Muktibodh writes so much about Prasad because there is a certain kind of anger that he can direct towards Prasad, but with Nirala he is confused because he is more and more like Nirala in that sense. So, in fact, the kind of marginality that Nirala suffers during his own lifetime, writing as a Hindi writer, Muktibodh also suffers. So, I suspect that there is an unconscious sort of identification with Nirala, and hence feels no need to write on Nirala, but write on Prasad. About individualism, yes, I mean, Muktibodh starts writing on Prasad from 1937-38 onwards. So in the paper, I do track the changing meanings of the word individualism. But yeah, in this presentation, it was not there. But I do track the changing sort of senses of the word individual. So I think we'll come back to that discussion. Yeah.
I think we can conclude discussions here and then continue even after tomorrow. By Swapna for 14 minutes.
It is my honor and privilege to propose a vote of thanks at the close of this insightful session on print and literature. First and foremost, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Abhilash Malair, chair of the session, for steering the discussion with scholarly depth. A special thanks to our distinguished speakers for their thought-provoking presentation. Dr. Prachi Deshpande unpacked the layers of memory, anecdote and folktale, drawing attention to the social attitudes and life in the early 20th century. In a presentation about Durga Bhagwat's memoir, she highlighted its value beyond mere recollection. Dr. John Thomas offered a fresh perspective on missionary literature of the late 19th and early 20th century in Central Travancore. His presentation reflected a complex idea of reform, gender, and racial prejudice, as well as the changing social stratification. Dr. Soumya Malviya traced Muktibodh's critical engagement with Kamyani, revealing how personal reflection, caste Hinduism, Marxist thought, and poetic sensibility which shaped the Hindi literary criticism. Today, your insights made the session truly enriching. I would also like to thank Jelena Antony for the warm welcome, and to the KCHR and Department of History SSUS for jointly organizing such an engaging workshop. Finally, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the faculty members, the organizing committee, and all the participants for their presence and support.
Thank you, sir.